The chat GPT came up with some devastating psychological truths. And one of them was that genuine growth feels like a death. So this is just a post that I saw a while ago, and I thought it was quite perceptive. Um, so yeah, genuine growth feels like death, and I agree with that. I really do. I think genuine growth is a lot more all-encompassing and radical and challenging endeavor than kind of self-help spirituality or mainstream psychology makes it sound like. So it's really a type of hero's journey, and we may need to undergo that whole cycle in a small scale several times, and on a big scale maybe once or twice in our life. But yeah, like real transformation, like genuine change really requires kind of relinquishment of the survival strategies and the coping strategies that our sense of self is kind of built upon in many ways. So that's why it feels quite terrifying when it's actually happening. It feels like annihilation almost. There is a rebirth, if you could go through this hero's journey, the full cycle of it, but this descent to the underworld, that can be surprisingly thorough, right? To the deep shadow space. Like it takes years for everyone. And like I always say that it's an aspect of awakening. It's inseparable from awakening. There is no awakening without the illumination of the unconsciousness. So that's why it's worth talking about, in non-duality. It's not just about the insight. It's not just about the clear seeing and so on. It's always coming hand in hand with genuine growth at the human level. As far as I see it, I don't really see how it would be possible to undergo such radical shifts at the identity level and at the level of perception and remain exactly the same, at the relative level. Like, well, sure, we all have personalities. There's, like certain way of being that is natural for us, certain personality traits that will most likely always be there. But a lot of what we imagine to be us, like our personality, is actually not that type of, you could say, natural expression. Like a lot of what we take ourselves to be in that regards is these type of survival strategies and coping mechanisms and defense mechanisms that are surprisingly challenging and hard to to kind of release or unbind the identity, from them. And some of these are these type of cognitive organization patterns, you could say, like behavioral patterns and cognitive organization structures that are just really not in alignment with the natural state, with this fluidity, this non-fixating nature. They're like so rigid, this type of conditioning that constitutes certain aspects of personality that are not really unique to us in any possible way. We could talk about personality disorders and stuff like that, but they are really shared characteristics. So they're kind of collective forms of, you could say, tendencies, inherited tendencies, relationally inherited or genetically inherited tendencies that are deeply rooted in the nervous system, in the physiology, and that greatly shape our experience of reality. So if you go through awakening shift and shift to non-duality, shift to no self, it's not possible that this type of old, rigidified structures remain there. They just tend to kind of fall away, like for at least to a certain amount with the shift, like the amount of percentage that falls away, that's individual. It could be, I don't know, 30%, it could be 80%. But I don't think for anyone it will be 100%. It's just not really realistic. It can feel like that when the shift happens, like initially, maybe for even a year or two, or that it's all wiped out. The conditioning that used to appear as a sense of being a person and all that, it really may feel like that because there is this specific aspect, or you could say phase of the journey, when people are really immersed into the absolute nature. But that is often then followed by this, you could say, re-entry to the humanness. And then you kind of discover that not all of the conditioning, this type of conditioning, just fell away. Actually, there's some of it still left there. And that's when the shadow work really comes in. And it's really unavoidable. Like with non-dual realization, with no self-realization, you can't avoid this stuff. That's just not an option anymore. It just, there's nowhere to hide anymore in the experience when that fundamental dividing mechanism and dissociating mechanism is not there anymore. So that the stuff is gonna come out in one way or another. And it's a real possibility, to actually release somatically at the level of nervous system, at the level of, psyche, these type of strategies, relational strategies, defense mechanisms that are quite rigid, and are quite solidified and that hurt, even physically, they can feel just really agonizing in this non-dual unfiltered mode. But yeah, to go back to where I started this video to talk about that growth, genuine growth feels like death. So I do think that even if we haven't been through the shift to non-duality, it is possible to go through a profound transformation where you actually access, these type of root patterns in your being that's been greatly shaping your reality, in kind of some sort of root narrative or whatever we want to call it. It's definitely possible, I think, to most people. Like if you have this type of really kind of healthy ego, you could say, like it's rare, but some people have it. That seems to be more accessible than this type of inner work, genuine shadow work and genuine growth, genuine transformation at the relative level, like even if you don't go through non-dual awakening. And then for some people, you go through non-dual awakening and this type of growth, this type of transformation, at the level of the character, I guess you could say it like that. I mean, it's not really at the level of character. It's really more in our human experience, at the level of this somatic and psychological ways of kind of perceiving or interpreting or constructing the experience, because that capacity is still there, right? So with non-duality, we have realized that basic nature, that unfabricated, uncontrived nature, which is the absolute nature that is totally pure and spontaneous and acausal. But there is still the relative human experience, and the more these kind of fuse and blend together in a way that is very hard to explain. It's just a kind of experiential unfolding that people discover by going through this process. But there happens this type of fusion between our human nature and the absolute nature, and which makes possible then this type of profound act of unification, where we really are able to release some of these type of fundamental conditionings that are not in alignment, with the natural flow, with the fluidity of anatta. And I think that only through this type of non-dual clarity, these root issues can be fully accessed. So that's the beauty of it, but that's also the ordeal of it, because it's gonna be intense for a lot of people. So it's a different kind of healing than what we, I don't know, again, are maybe associating the word healing, It's not like a temporary relief. It's not a way to feel better or feel more at peace or at acceptance. It's nothing like that. This type of healing that goes to the root of our being, I think it's a form of grace. Fundamentally, there's something about it that just there's some sort of intelligence at work there that is so perfect and integrative and non-conceptual and redemptive. I mean, it feels like annihilation, but it's a kind of like surgical operation, because some of these conditionings and some of these kind of pieces of you could say trauma or they are deep in the psyche, and sometimes it's a very painful process when they are being pulled out. And it's a messy process. It doesn't maybe at all necessarily look like that something good is going to come out of it. You kind of have to go through this type of chaos for that deeper intelligence to fully reveal itself and take over. But that's what the shadow work kind of is, or the hero's journey, the descent to the underworld. We are going for these pieces, these pieces of psyche that are somehow lost there, somehow. And there's a lot of psychic energy bound in them, and these conditioned, I would say remnants of conditioned patterns are somehow also bound to these pieces, so they need to be removed. And it's only when that happens that then this type of poison, which can be experienced as unhealed woundedness in our being, in whatever way that happens or manifests. But when you have this experience of accessing the root, it's kind of like you realize the wound was never really even there. So it's beyond healing. It's very hard to explain how that feels like. It's like the wounds completely disappear or evaporate, and there is just this untouched nature, like perfectly untouched, invulnerable nature, which is also very embodied and very human. So it's not that kind of untouched invulnerability that you can find in the absolute, as something other than human experience. This is something that you discover through the vulnerability of the human experience and through the vulnerability of going through this type of deep shadow work. Yeah, I guess another word for it could be equanimity. Like really this very enigmatic equanimity that becomes more and more tangible, with the non-dual awakening.